Joel Salatin, welcome to the Meat Mafia podcast. We are so excited to have you.
Thank you. It's my honor, and I'm delighted to be with you. Yes.
So we usually start off by doing this little thing where we talk about the different guests that we've had on. So we've had on a few Virginians, so you're not our first Virginian on the podcast. We've had on a few farmers. You're not our first farmer. We've had on a Virginia farmer, so you're not our first Virginian farmer. But you are our first Virginian farmer who's been on Joe Rogan's podcast. So that is your differentiator right now. And I think you might keep that title for a while.
It might be. Yeah, might be.
And I'm thinking too, Joel, sometimes one of the traditions on the Meat Mafia podcast is we like to do a baptism by bone broth. But with your tradition of drinking out of the trough, we might have to switch that to the trough potentially. I think that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. I drink out of the trough whenever I can.
Well, Joel, it's a pleasure to have you on. You've been a real inspiration for us. I know when I first started getting interested in regenerative farming, I came across your work and was struck by the honest and genuine nature into which you speak about bringing real food to every American's tables. And I think that the work you've done to date in terms of publishing books, getting on podcasts, the work that you're doing on your farm is just incredible. So we're honored to have you on today, and we're excited to talk about Polyface and all the different things that you've been up to over the past few months and years.
Sure. Great. Well, you lead and I'll dance with you. That sounds fine.
Let's do it.
Beautiful. Harrison, I don't know if it was similar to you, but Joel, I first came across you, I think I was a sophomore in high school, and it was pretty cool because my science class actually showed us Food Inc.
Oh.
And that was really the first exposure that I got into our food system, and really just understanding the role that big food plays and how vastly, how far we've moved away from eating actual real food. Harrison, I don't know if it was similar for you, if you got to see it in high school or not, but that was the first time I came across Joel.
My first experience with Joel was through Michael Pollan's book. So
got it.
Yeah, I mean, you've been everywhere, Joel. So maybe a good place to start for people who aren't familiar with you is just maybe how you got into farming, maybe a little bit of the backstory behind Polyface. I think that would be great context for people, just as a starting point.
Sure. So yeah, it's always hard to know where to start, but unlike a lot of farmers in this space, my non-chemical, unorthodoxy goes back before me. My grandfather, my dad's dad, was a charter subscriber to Rodale's Organic Gardening and Farming magazine when it came out in 1948. And so he influenced my dad, and my dad was in a business administration. He was a good numbers guy and an accountant. And so, I grew up this way. All right. So we came to the farm in 1961 when I was 4 years old, and it was the cheapest, most worn out, gullied rock pile in the whole region. It was cheap. That's why Dad bought it. It was cheap. And back in those days, land was actually valued based on its productive capacity. Not anymore. Now it's based on its viewscape and location. But anyway, started in, and dad got experts. He got public and private consultants to come in and ask them, how do I make a living on this farm? And every one of them, both public and private, the advice was buy chemical fertilizer, plant corn, plow up everything, graze the woods, build silos, borrow more money. And as an economist and an accountant, Dad knew that just wasn't right. And of course, the chemicals that, vexed his righteous soul. And so we went through those 3 years of seeking, and then he realized, nobody has an answer for me. And so we just started, I was just a kid, started, looking at other things, and found Andre Voisin, who was the Frenchman who kind of developed the grass, the rotational grazing, grass farming kind of concept. And then we went, I remember one Sunday, I was maybe 7 or 8, 6 maybe, and we went down the road somewhere, and spent a Sunday afternoon with a farmer who was using portable shelters with his animals. He was moving them around, and I don't remember what animals it were. I don't know where we went, north or south. I don't know where it was, but what I remember was coming home, Dad's almost just childish enthusiasm over the concept of mobile infrastructure. That was a breakthrough. And so from that day on, dad really developed his thinking toward mobile infrastructure and mobile animals, moving them around. So he invented some portable electric fence systems, a shade mobile for cows, like a portable shade tree. And then Mom was a school teacher. And so with their off-farm jobs, the farm got paid for within 10 years. So now we're at 1971. I'm now 14, and I got my first chickens at 10 years old, started selling eggs. I was, entrepreneurial, gift of gab, and everybody loved this little kid with eggs. So I sold these eggs around, and the flock grew and grew and grew. And time I'm 14, I've got, 300 hens. I'm getting 80, 90 dozen eggs a week. I got to sell them. And so we hooked up with the local cur market, which was a Depression era market developed for farmers to be able to get cash. Farmers had food but no cash, and people in the city had cash but no food. So it was kind of a precursor. And the beautiful thing was there were no regulations. There was an agreement between the inspection service and the extension service that if I joined 4-H and a woman joined the extension homemakers clubs, we could sell anything there without inspection. So we could butcher beef, chickens, we could milk a cow, make yogurt, kefir, cottage cheese, meat pies, all this stuff. We could do all that and sell it. So all through high school, I was up every weekend of the year. It was a Saturday morning market, opened at 6 o'clock. Can you imagine? And I was up every Saturday morning at 4 o'clock to go down there and sell stuff. And so this is mid 70s. This is the beginning of the hippie, Woodstock, the beaded, bearded, braless, there was a kind of a back to the land movement then. And I've always said we were literally 20 years ahead of our time. But we did see the opportunity in branded direct marketing as a local farm, and we built up a local clientele. Then I went off to college. Nobody in the family wanted to do it, so we closed down the stand. And by the time I came home, the two elderly matrons that had been there when I was a teen, they had closed up and left. And those two elderly matrons, one did baking items, one was a kind of diversified homestead. But through my teen years, they took me under wing, told me how to present stuff, market stuff, make signage, deal with good customers, bad customers. I wouldn't trade that experience for $1 million to actually be down there as a kid under the tutelage of these two elderly grandmothers, and I'll always be grateful and beholden to them. And so then when I came back from college, I said, okay, so now it's my turn. Dad's still working in town. Mom's still teaching school. I want to farm. How do I farm full time? And I realized, we'd always milked a couple Guernsey cows. I said, you know what? I could milk 10 cows, sell the milk at retail, not jack it up because it's organic, not jack it up because it's grass. Just sell it like Kroger sells it, and Food Lion and Safeway. Just sell it at regular retail price. I could milk 10 cows and make a living on this farm. There was only one problem. It was illegal.
Yep.
And I've never gotten over the fact that illegality kept me off the farm. So I went to work in town at the local newspaper. I'd worked there some in high school, and Teresa and I got married. We filled out an apartment in the attic, and we lived on $300 a month. Drove a $50 car. She could sew anything, cook anything, can anything. She started canning 800 quarts of stuff a summer. If we didn't grow it, we didn't eat it. We only ate out of our garden. We didn't have a TV, still don't have a TV, and lived frugally. And so in a couple of years, even though we didn't get paid a lot, we were saved enough that we could live on the farm for 1 year. So I handed in my notice and walked out of that office September 24, 1982. And came back to the farm full time. I was 25. I fully expected that we'd run through it. I'd have to go take work somewhere, to fill in. But as it turned out, never had to go back out off the farm. It was nip and tuck for about 3 years, but we started, direct marketing again, finding customers, telling our story. It took about 3 or 4 years till we, realized, we could breathe and say, okay, we're going to make it. And today, we get 25 salaries off the farm. We service about 8,000 families. We ship nationwide. We service some, 40 restaurants, 10 institutions, commercial establishments. And it's just been, we never aspired to it, but here it is. And we're just really grateful and blessed to be here.
It's amazing to hear that story too, because people just see the finished product of Polyphase Farms and they don't necessarily understand the whole backstory of what went into it. Like you were saying, you and your wife living off of $300 a month, just eating with the food that you were growing on the farm. Just a quick question, Joel, what was it particularly about farming and ranching that spoke to you as a kid or as a teenager that made you realize that was ultimately what you wanted to do with your life?
Well, a lot of things happen when you're a child and you don't realize the significance till sometimes years later looking back. And so one of the things I know that struck me was, so we came to this farm. I was 4 when we came, and it was, when I say it, we had a 16-foot deep gully we measured. I could walk the whole farm and never set foot on a piece of vegetation. It was that barren. And the garden, there was a garden space by the house, and it was nothing but clay clods. I mean, you had to break them up with a sledgehammer to know whether it was a rock or dirt. I mean, the garden, and my grandfather, remember I mentioned him, he was a charter subscriber to Rodale's Organic Gardening and Farming magazine. So he lived in Indiana, and we'd go and visit him, once a year or so in the fall or in the late summer after hay was in and before school started, because Mom was a school teacher. So we had to go between hay and school starting, right? So we always went about the same time of year up to Grandma and Grandpa's in Indiana. And he had these compost piles, and his soil, it was black, and you could just stick your arm in it, and everything was verdant. And he had this tea trellis grape arbor around it. He had a huge garden. It was like a 1/4 acre, which, it was a pretty big garden. And he sold produce, in the community. And he had this T-top trellis all the way around. Of course, I'm a little kid, 7, 8, 9 years old, and I could just barely reach these clusters of grapes. And they were always ripe when we were up there late in the summer, and they would just be dripping with juice and sweetness. And of course, those bees up in there and all that. And looking back, I realized that something got into my soul where I wanted to be able to immerse myself in that kind of abundance. And our farm was struggling. It was weedy. It was thistles. You'd have thought we were growing thistles as a crop. It was infertile. It was not an abundance place, but Grandpa's place was an abundance place. And so the idea the idea of just being able to fall into that womb of nurturing abundance, just I think it, as they say, it got a hold of me and never let go.
Joel, can you speak to how you guys went about restoring your land? There's obviously your ability to use some of that mobile infrastructure seems like it maybe played a good role in how you guys manage that. But the whole management process of restoring infertile land is something that I think a lot of people are really interested in hearing more about.
Well, absolutely. So we looked at nature and said, well, how does nature build soil? Nature doesn't build soil with 10-10-10 chemical fertilizer and plows. Nature, the deepest, richest soils on the planet are actually under grasslands, not forests and not bushes. They're under prairies, grasslands, the American Midwest, the Pampas of Argentina, the Serengeti of Africa, the steppes of Mongolia. These were all, these are where the most fertile, deepest soils on the planet are. And they were where the megafauna was, the megafauna, I mean, historically, the mastodons all the way to, the bison and the wildebeest and the llamas and alpacas, all of these were this megafauna. So what you had these perennials as opposed to annuals. So annuals have to be planted every year. That's like, squash and cucumbers and barley and wheat and corn. Perennials are your clovers and grasses and a lot of forbs, grow year after year after year. And so, and the energy flow is completely different between an annual and a perennial. An annual is always putting its energy into some sort of big seed or fruit or something like that. So it is soil energy extractive into some fruit, seed, nut, whatever. Whereas a perennial it places energy in the ground because it needs a bank account of energy in the ground to withstand a flood, a drought, a hot, a cold, to withstand extremes because there's nobody around to plant it. It doesn't rejuvenate by seed as much as it rejuvenates from root ground, from root energy. That's the big difference between a perennial and an annual. So the energy flow is completely different. And so that's why the deep soils on the planet were all developed under perennials. And nature has very few annuals. There are annuals, but they're primarily short-term healers. They're, after a flood comes through and rips up something, or a volcano, devastates something. It's a kind of a short-term placeholder until the perennials can come back in. And so, we've been here since 1961. We've never planted a seed in the pasture. All of the now, we've probably increased from that point. We've probably increased the productive capacity. I'm not exaggerating here. Hang with me. About tenfold. Okay, wow. About tenfold. So that increase has not come because we plowed or because we bought fertilizer. We haven't even applied fertilizer. I'll tell you what we applied in a minute, but it has come as we have stimulated and leveraged the resources on site and the multi-speciation that nature would have normally had. And so the point is that one of the first things that we did was start moving the cows around with portable electric fence. When you look at herbivores in nature, they're nature's pruners of these grasslands. The thing about these grasslands, these prairies, is that they grow in a cycle. They grow in an S curve. They start slow, then grow real fast, then go into senescence. I call that diaper grass, teenage grass, and nursing home grass. And so if we want to collect more solar energy and convert solar energy into biomass, into carbon, what we want is for that grass to be in that fast growth period, not in diaper stage and not out here in nursing home stage. And it's the herbivore. Nature uses the herbivore to prune that plant as it approaches senescence, to freshen it up and restart it. Just like, it's amazing. People would assume that an orchardist who doesn't prune his apple trees is negligent, or a viticulturalist who doesn't prune his grapevines is negligent. But somehow those of us who mimic nature's pruners with cattle to prune perennials and refresh and start this for carbon sequestration, somehow we're destroying the planet. I mean, it's crazy. But the bison, the wildebeest, the alpacas, the water buffalo, all of those things, those are all pruners that restart this vegetative cycle so that the grass can regrow and put more energy in the soil, concentrate more sunlight into decomposable biomass. So that's one thing. The second thing is that the soil is built with decomposition. and so the more we can get decomposition into the soil, on the soil, and stimulate carbon decomposition, the better the soil is going to be. So we began composting. We started doing this carbonaceous diaper under the cows when we fed hay in the barn, and we let it, build up. The cows tromp out the oxygen. It's anaerobic. We add corn to it. The corn ferments. The cows come out. This bedding pack might be 4 feet deep. We put in the pigs. The pigs seek the fermented corn. And as they do that, they aerate the anaerobic stack, turn it into aerobic compost. And that is our fertilizer program. So instead of buying, chemical fertilizer, we bought a big commercial chipper that we used to generate wood chips from forest work, tree line trimming, junk, down trees, crooked trees, things like that. As we upgrade and weed the wood lot, that then becomes integrated. Forest gets integrated into pasture and brings fungi into the bacteria. Grasslands tend to be bacterial. Forest lands tend to be fungal. The best soils have both bacteria and fungi. And so by integrating the forest land and the open land, we actually build that soil. So the first soil test we took in 1961, we averaged less than 1% organic matter. Today,
Wow.
we average over 8% organic matter. So that's a pretty dramatic difference. And when you realize that 1 pound of organic matter holds 4 pounds of water, we can now hold 130,000 gallons more water per acre now than we did 60 years ago. So this stuff works. I'm not saying that to brag. This stuff works. And so, as we started down that path, we started doing a portable shade mobile, moving the cows every day. And we just saw nature respond. And then we added the chickens, and then we added the pigs, and then we added turkeys and rabbits and ducks and sheep. And it's this, we call it ballet in the pasture. It's a choreography of animal movement through the pasture. And what produced 1,000 pounds 60 years ago produces 10,000 pounds today.
The restoration of the ecosystem is amazing. The water cycle point is one that I find very fascinating, where I think you hit on it, but like 1% increase or decrease in soil carbon equates to almost like 2 swimming pools worth of water in the soil. And at the same time, we're seeing conventional agriculture, which is not restoring the soil. And we're seeing desertification, soil erosion, and all these other negative externalities in relation to how that land management is occurring. And I find it fascinating, the comparison and contrast between what you're doing in conventional agriculture. Can you speak to some of the high input topics of agriculture and like what you've seen? Because sounds like you never even really entertained the idea of going the high input route. I'm curious if you guys ever even thought about it.
No, we never even thought about it. We realized that soil is built the way nature works. If we want to call it the template of nature, it's all about decomposition. It's about carbon in situ. In other words, a carbon on site. How do we leverage the carbon on site? And so the whole food system today, the industrial food system is a primarily segregated system. We have broken apart these symbiotic relationships in nature. Let me just give you an example. In nature, the herbivore goes down into the valley to graze because that's where the best grass is. And then predators drive them up on the hilltop when they're ready to ruminate. And so they go down, they graze in the valley, they go up to the top of the hill so they can look out and make sure the predators aren't coming. And in doing so, they urinate and defecate on the hilltop. So one of the reasons for animals in nature is to bring gravitationally moving carbon, minerals, and vitamins and that naturally aggregate in the valley floor, to bring those back up to the ridge top so that you democratize fertility. Otherwise the ridge tops and slopes would become completely infertile and everything would collect down in the valleys. So it's the predator cycle. It's the herbivore and the predator cycle that nature uses, and birds too, to defy the gravitational movement that would concentrate minerals and fertility in low ground and instead go against gravity and bring it to high ground. So this natural, this natural animal fertility democratization is a profound ecological principle, and something that obviously the Beyond Beef and Impossible Burger folks aren't, have no appreciation for. I don't know if they don't have a concept of it, but they certainly don't have an appreciation of it.
And Joel, one of the things that you mentioned a few minutes ago was this, almost, I think you described it as like a ballet and choreography that a lot of your animals on the farm are doing. Can you expand on that ballet and choreography and how important that is to the overall ecosystem health of Polyface?
Sure. So imagine, the cows are coming. So you got this tall grass, right? And because it's up there towards senescence, it's not short overgrazed stuff. It's full of spiders and moles and voles and pollinators. And I mean, it's just a cacophony of biomass abundance and insect and pollinator life. Okay. So the cows come through, and they eat most of it. They tromp some of it onto the soil surface. They actually chip up some of the, we call this mob stalking, herbivorous, solar conversion, lignified sequestration, fertilization. And they come through, and now it's a whole different situation where they ate a lot, they pooped, they urinated, and they tramped a lot of it on the ground. So we come behind the cows about 4 or 5 days with the eggmobile. So an eggmobile is simply a portable chicken house. The chickens free range out from the eggmobile, and they scratch through the cow patties to eat the fly larvae, also called maggots, as you know. And I mean, to a chicken, a maggot is like, Breyer's ice cream, right? So they're eating these fly larvae. The fly larvae energize the chickens to scratch. So they take this little cow pie and they spread it into a great big area, which fertilizes the pasture. They eat the exposed crickets, grasshoppers, pathogens, and things like that, and help to scratch the duff and the dried grass again into the soil surface. And so the chickens act as a sanitizer behind the cows, just like the egret on the rhino's nose. And so that's one thing that goes through. Obviously, the sheep can go through as well. The turkeys can be on that same pasture. So at different times in a season and occupying different spots at different times in the same field, there might be cows, meat chickens, egg-laying chickens, and turkeys, all in the same area. And so what that does is, not only does it increase the economic viability, because you're actually stacking you're stacking complementary enterprises on the same land base. So most farmers are monocropping. Even beef cattle farmers are monocrop. They're just raising beef, right? And so what we want to do is permaculture style. We want to have stacking enterprises that bring more economic benefit on a given acre. That's one thing. The second thing is that then we get the benefits of all, not only the pruning that the cow does, but the pecking and scratching that the chicken does, and the long-legged insect consumption that the turkeys offer. And the turkeys offer a different, and each of these animals offers a different kind of manure, a different relationship of nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, molybdenum, boron, cobalt in their manure. And so, because all of them have a different digestive system, and all of that adds a complexity rather than simplicity. Modern conventional agriculture is all predicated on the fact that this is all very, very simple, and it's mechanistic, and we can simplify this down to basically it's mechanical, like a bunch of interchangeable parts. Whereas I believe that it's fundamentally complex. In fact, a lot of it is mysterious. In fact, we've only named 10% of the bacteria in the soil. 90% of the soil beings have not even been identified yet. That's how little we know about the soil. And yet we've got people, wading into that arena like a bunch of swashbuckling pirates, and we're just gonna, take here and move here and move this around, with complete hubris and no humility to the, to the intricacy that's going on. Every cubic foot of soil every second has, a quadrillion exchanges going on, just like our microbiome. Our microbiome has a quadrillion spontaneous decisions happening per millisecond as our trillions of microbes. I'll trade you a boron for some of that polysaccharide, and I'll trade you, I just view all this as kind of Star Wars, when Luke Skywalker walks into that space cafe looking for a fast ship, and he first meets Han Solo, right? He's got the Millennium Falcon, and over in the corner, there's this band playing, there's all these aliens, 2 heads and 3 tails and all this stuff. And that's why I see the soil as all these, alien looking critters, one's lopping off somebody's head. Another one's got a narwhal spear. He sucks out the aqueous little 4-legged thing and, sucks it out. And all this stuff's going on like it makes Steven Spielberg look like child's play. It's that exciting, the drama, the theater, and the cinema going on in our microbiome and in the soil.
So Joel, you bring the carbon content in the soil from 1% to 8%. Your production capacity increases tenfold. Can you speak to the quality of the product that you're producing at the endpoint of that journey? So like, is the beef and chicken and pig meat that you guys are producing, is that better quality after you've made all these changes on the farm?
Oh, is it better? Yeah. You just almost like rattle the chain to see if the dog will bark, don't you?
Yeah.
So,
that was a softball.
Tee that one up.
Softball. Yeah, that was a softball. So, we've had numerous empirical studies done, fat studies, saturated, unsaturated, mono, different things. One interesting one that we did several years ago was with 11 other pastured egg producers in America. We looked at 12 things, and we sent the eggs to a lab. And what we're trying to settle was, so many people say, "Oh, come on, an egg is an egg is an egg. There's not, there's no difference in the eggs." And so we looked at 12 nutrients, and it wasn't little 10% variations. It was dramatic. I'll give you one. Folic acid. Folic acid is really important for pregnant women. And the USDA, you go to the store and it's got the USDA nutrient label on there. It'll tell you that the egg has like 48 micrograms of folic acid per egg. And our eggs, you ready for this? Our eggs averaged 1,038 micrograms per egg.
Wow.
So we're not talking about little percentage deviations. Riboflavin in beef, in grass finished beef, is 300% more than riboflavin in corn fed beef. Well, you say, well, what's the importance of riboflavin? Well, riboflavin is the calming essential fatty acid. In other words, it calms your nerves. So, you wonder sometimes why everybody's shooting off and being short with everybody and shooting up schools and road rage and, part of it is because we're not getting riboflavin, in our meats. Another one, I mean, there are numerous one of these. There's a real interesting thing that happened with with cooking. So we have tried to work with numerous institutions, and we've succeeded a couple of times, but we've failed many times. And most of the times we fail, it's because they have some sort of cooking protocol. And what we've learned from all of our chefs and our institutional customers is that all of our meats cook about 20%, 25% shorter period of time than the store-bought stuff. And we don't know exactly why. I mean, whether you're barbecuing a chicken, cooking a hamburger, whatever it is, making pork barbecue, pulled pork, it always cooks way faster. And there are a couple things. One is that because of the exercise, so here's an interesting one. I don't know if you guys ever heard this, that muscle becomes moist when it gets exercised. It gets dry when it's not exercised. So muscles that are exercised are tough but moist. Muscles that are not exercised are tender but dry. So think about a chicken breast, tender but dry, whereas the thigh is tougher but more moist. And moist, I'm going to say succulent. Okay, succulence. So succulence has to do with movement, and tenderness has to do with non-movement. And so what we have found is that our meats are more moist. We actually learned this. The main test that we passed on this was with Chipotle. We supplied Chipotle for 10 years before they went to centralized and kind of lost their convictions, if you will. But anyway, we supplied two of their restaurants for 10 years. Wow. And they only used pork shoulders for their carnitas because the shoulder is way more moist than the ham because there's more exercise. The front of the animal gets more exercise than the back of the animal. And so when they said, well, we're only going to use the shoulders, I said, well, we can't work with you because we got to move the shoulders in the ham because we got to use more of the pig. If you're going to use 8 or 10 a week, we got to move the rest of this thing. And so they actually had us ship them out some hams, and they found that our hams were as moist as any shoulder they could find. Wow. And in fact, my father-in-law used to grow pigs, when he was a kid, and they had a 24-inch threshold in the little pig shed where the pigs would jump in to get water and feed and stuff. And I asked my father-in-law, after when I was over there courting Teresa, my wife, and I said, why do you have that 24-inch? I mean, it looks like those pigs have to really work to jump up in there every time, He said, oh, that's the exercise of the hams and makes the hams real moist. And so this was something that people knew, part of food lore, back in the day. And today it's all about just faster, fatter, bigger, cheaper. Nobody asks about taste. Nobody asks about nutritional quality. It's just protoplasmic structure. How fast, how cheap can we grow it? And what we're seeing is there are dramatic differences in the quality, both nutrition, taste, and handling, dramatically different all the way across the board.
Joel, one of the things you touched on a few minutes ago was just the micronutrient profile of the eggs from Polyface. You mentioned how the riboflavins off the chart, all the micronutrients. Do you think that that's part of where we've gone wrong within our food system? Is this tendency to over focus on calories and macronutrients, proteins, carbs, and fat versus the actual micronutrient profile that you're able to extract from your food?
Oh, without a doubt. Absolutely. We have seen, look, fundamentally in our culture, food is viewed as primarily just inert stuff. It's like petroleum in the car, right? And in fact, now think about it. Sterility is now equated with safety. So if we want safe food, it's got to be sterilized. And so what we have is a situation where Coca-Cola is sterile. I mean, you can't grow you can't grow mold in Coca-Cola, right? But raw milk is unsafe because it's unsterile. But our microbiome is not sterile. I mean, our microbiome is a petri dish, of microbes. And so, Velveeta cheese. I mean, you could squirt Velveeta cheese on the table, walk away from it for 2 years. It doesn't mold. It doesn't dry. It just sits there for 2 years. It doesn't change at all. But you put real cheese on a table and at ambient temperature in 5 days, it's all fuzzy, grows legs and walks off the table. And so essentially, if it won't rot, it won't decompose. If it won't decompose, it won't digest. So, I mean, that's such a simple rule. And yet red dye 29, monosodium glutamate, high fructose corn syrup. I mean, all of our, not all, but most of our foods, the conventional foods now in the supermarket are all selected for shelf life, for non-rotting, non-digesting. That's what they're selected for. Nobody's selecting tomatoes for nutrient profile. They're selecting tomatoes that can withstand bouncing around in the back of a truck for 1,500 miles, going from the farm to the supermarket. And if that's what you're selecting for tomatoes, you're going to get cardboard tomatoes. Cardboard tomatoes don't have nutrition in them. Anybody that's had a homegrown juice running down your elbow tomato knows the difference between the cardboard tomato at the supermarket and a homegrown tomato. And so, those differences are really, really easy to tell. And I would just say this too. One of the most dramatic things that I ever saw was the pet test. So we had a customer who had a little pet dog and little Pomeranian or something, and it wouldn't eat meat it wouldn't eat meat. She know what was wrong with it. Why don't it wouldn't ever eat meat. And so she heard about us and she wanted to come out and get some meat. And so she came out and her husband gave her the raspberries. Oh, you're going to pay, an arm and a leg and it can't be worth anything, blah, blah, blah. And she came out anyway and got some, went home. She's in the kitchen fixing, something, and the dog's in, and the dog's just worrying her to death, yipping at her heels, just caring. She said, look, you don't even like meat. What are you yipping around? It worried her so much. She finally dropped a piece of meat on the floor and the dog immediately dropped on it and devoured it. Just as her husband came down the stairs to the kitchen, he saw that. He said, wherever you went and got that meat, that's the only meat I'm eating the rest of my life. And they trusted their dog more than anything else, And so she told me that story. I couldn't believe it. So I actually went to the store, got some meat and got some of ours, and I put it out. We had 4 cats. We didn't have a Pomeranian dog. We had 4 cats at the time. And I put the 2 out on paper plates on the back porch and sat back to watch. Those cats came up. They put their noses and smelled the stuff from the supermarket. And then all 4, I took pictures of it. All 4 of them surrounded the paper plate with our, it was ground beef on it. And they ate it and almost ate the plate and licked it up before they would even go over and look at the adjacent. I mean, I didn't put them 5 feet apart. I put them, 6 inches apart, and they wouldn't even look at that. And so I always tell people, if you don't trust yourself or trust a doctor or trust my slick marketing campaign, ask your pets, and your pets will tell you. That's what you need to do.
What do you attribute that to? Is that their ability to actually smell some of these nutrients that are more abundant in your meat?
Oh, absolutely. Animals are so much more tuned in. Look, they don't have TVs. So they don't have social media. They don't have stuff going on in their heads and their ears, telling them you're supposed to, you can look like whatever, Bo Derek, if you eat like this. And they don't have any. I'm dating myself, Bo, she's like not young anymore. Anyway,
you might have to do some research on that one when we get offline.
No, she's beautiful. She's beautiful. It's a good pick.
Yeah. So my point is that animals are so, keyed to the situation. They're not swayed by peer dependency. They're not swayed by media messaging, that sort of thing. And so, yes, they have a very innate sense. I had a neighbor, he bought a little place, a homestead near us. He was buying some hay, and we were talking about hay one day, and he said, would you mind, selling me a couple bales, and I can just see if there's any difference in hay, in the community. And so he took a patty of our hay, put it down the bottom of the manger. He had a milk cow, put it in the bottom of the manger, and then he took this other hay he'd been buying and covered it all up, stacked it up in the manger. All right. The cow walked in there. She took all that hay from the top, flung it out of the manger to get to ours in the bottom that was grown on compost instead of chemical fertilizer. Listen, those animals are so much smarter than us, when it comes to this. It's because they haven't lost their instinctual, primitive, innate, capacity to sense, to smell, to know how they feel. I mean, we don't even ask our bodies how they feel. We eat stuff, come up, oh, I feel terrible, and then we go back tomorrow, eat the same thing. Right. If you get up and feel terrible, why don't you eat something else, try something else? And if you feel good when you get up, well, then stay with that. And but we don't even trust ourselves. We just assume, well, I'm eating like everybody else, and I have a problem. I go to the doctor, I get Zentak, or I get Tums or whatever, and fix it. And listen, you're not having digestive orders because you're not having digestive disorders because you're drug deficient.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody is sick because they're drug deficient. And so you need to be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. Joel, speaking of that kind of intuitive approach to eating, what approach has worked the best for you, your wife, and your family over the years to help you kind of metabolically thrive and feel your best?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and I don't know that we have it all figured out, but I think a lot is this whole thing I'm talking about. How do you feel? And for me, I'm a meat and fruit guy. I thrive on fruit, and I thrive on meat. Do I eat vegetables? Yeah, I eat some vegetables, but I love bread, but bread doesn't love me, so I go easy on bread. And some of it's genetic, some of it is just our genetic soup is amazing. And when you look at different cultures around the world and what they eat, I think part of our problem as Americans is we just don't eat much variety anymore. If you get Dolly Madison or Martha Washington's cookbooks from either Montpelier or Mount Vernon, and Harrison, you know what I'm talking about. These are our Virginia, our great Virginia icons, right? But you get their cookbooks, and you know what? Half of the stuff in there, we don't even know what they are, currant berries and goose. And I mean, they have like 50 different kinds of fruit that they grew on their homesteads. I mean, this was common. Wow. They did, because they had to grow it. They didn't have Costco. They didn't have Walmart, right? So they had to grow it. And the Australian Aborigines, they say, ate 2,500 different things routinely, 2,500 different foodstuffs. Americans eat what, 25. We just don't eat any variety, and yet our microbiome is dependent on variety. So let me just say a word about that when it comes to pastured livestock. So getting these chickens out on a perennial diversified pasture. What we want is we want to be able to go out in that pasture, and in a few square feet, we want to be able to find 10, 15, 20 varieties of plants, clovers and grasses and forbs and legumes and different things. And so one of the fastest ways that a modern American can diversify their diet rapidly is eating pastured chickens, pastured eggs, pastured beef, that's on a perennial diversified pasture sward, not alfalfa, not corn, but a diversified perennial pasture sward, because every one of those plants brings in a different chemical, a different vitamin, a different mineral into the body, into the muscle tissue. And so we can tap in to that variety, that vegetative variety, by eating something that's been eating that kind of buffet in their diet.
That's such a nuanced point. It's so fascinating too.
Yeah, it is. So, hey, listen, to me, I would much rather get my salad in a good juicy burger or a T-bone steak than have to eat a salad. I mean, I do eat salad, but anyway, it makes a humorous way to look at how are you getting that diversity in your diet.
Joel, one of the things
go ahead.
I just had a really quick question just based off that, because I'm very interested. Harrison and I have talked about this a lot, Joel, and we've had on a few guests that have talked about pasture raised versus grass-fed, grass-finished meat. You were touching on some of the imperial studies and some of the nutritional studies you've done with your own meat. Do you find, is pasture raised versus grass-fed, grass-finished more impactful in terms of the nutrient content of your meat? I don't know how nuanced that question is, but just curious what matters more.
Yeah, well, as you can imagine, there's all sorts of whatever clever speak and greenwashing out there in the movement, and so we like to use the term for beef. For beef, we like to say grass finished, because right now the industry says that if a cow has ever eaten one blade of grass, then she's obviously grass fed. Well, that's not what a person, when they say grass fed, they mean not grain fed, right? But the industry uses very clever speak and wordsmithing and to obfuscate things. But the omnivore, we can't say grass finished on the omnivore, which is a turkey, chicken, pork, because they're eating a lot of grain supplementation. So there we use the term pasture raised or pasture based in order to differentiate from a factory farm. And of course, the next question, well, then what kind of pasture? Because now that's being adulterated with people that have stationary houses and a moonscape yard, or like the organic certification that requires outdoor. Well, they make a little 3-foot apron in a 10,000 bird house and call that pasture. The chickens never go outside; they never see it. Even in France, it's not just Americans. In France, the Label Rouge chickens. Label Rouge, which is their top brand of chicken in France, they say that the pasture doesn't do anything for the chicken except psychologically. The chicken can see out there and think that it's okay. So there are actually efforts right now to create video screens in houses. There was actually an experiment done on dairy cows to put eye goggles with pictures of pasture in a confinement dairy, and the cows actually responded and gave more milk because they thought they were on a bucolic setting. So there's all sorts of crazy things going on, and the main thing is look at the website carefully. I mean, we've got an organic certified outfit up near us here in the Shenandoah Valley. And if you go on their website, meet our farmers, meet their farmers. There's a dad and mom, and they got their couple kids, and they're all standing in front of their confinement chicken house. There's not a chicken outside. There's no chicken on pasture. Those chickens they're not getting any worms or bugs or fresh sunshine or anything. And so, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to look at a website and see what's actually going on. I was asked about an outfit that's shipping all over, and they're trying to present themselves as the homesteaders answer to the food system. And so I said, I'll look at their website. So I looked at their website. I clicked on chicken. Let's see how they do their chicken. And the homepage of their chicken is a homepage with the background is 5 Tyson chicken houses. Well, that's not a homesteader, that's not a pastured operation. So be smart when you're looking at websites. Obviously the best is to go visit the farm. That's the best thing. And turn off Netflix and just go visit the farm. But if you can't, you can actually really get skilled at looking at websites and comparing, and what's the pictures, what's the language, there are definitely red flags out there that you can see what's going on.
Joel, one of the things you brought up was variety. And I was really curious on getting your take on how we've almost bred variety out of a lot of the species in our food system, whether it's, corn, soy, wheat, like the variety of those plants has shrunk over, from 1900s to, even a few decades later. I think it's like, only a handful of species that are still being bred for those. And then the same thing with livestock and other animals. Does that play into that variety topic that you were talking about?
Oh, absolutely. Genetic diversity has been nature's adaptable wild card, right? For forever is genetic diversity. And that's why we have so many different breeds that have geographic names, because Guernsey came from the Guernsey Island. The Scottish Highlander didn't come from Senegal. It came from the Scottish Highlands. And so what we have are these geographical genetic types that thrived in a certain area, certain climate. And so what we would like to see at our farm, we're now hatching egg layers, chickens, and we have our own brood cow herd. We also buy calves, but we have brood cows. And what we'd like to see is basically a swope cow, a swope chicken, one that thrives in our bioregion. And then 50 miles away, there'd be another one. 50 miles away, there'd be another one. And so instead of getting hooked up with heritage breeds and stuff that worked, 500 years ago, let's take what our forefathers did in breeding and genetic selection, and let's create for our grandchildren, let's create 1,000 new brands, new genetic names that show special promise for adaptability in different bioregions. That would actually add diversity to the gene pool rather than detracting diversity from the gene pool, which is what we have right now. Oh, it's Angus cows. That's all you see.
Right.
Well, there's a lot of others with a lot of different traits, and let's add genetic diversity. No one animal, no one genetic profile has all the answers. There are always trade-offs. Well, we get maternal, but we lose fertility. We get fertility and we lose longevity. We get, and you trade off. So you're looking for a balance within the genetic pool.
Joel, one of the things I've heard you speak to is that you guys have a processing plant on site. Is that correct?
We do our own poultry.
Okay.
We don't do beef and pork, but we do our own poultry. And we co-own with another partner a small slaughterhouse. Yes, that does our beef and pork. Yes.
How do you? One of the things we talk about all the time is the concentration in that industry in particular. There's basically 4 players, and I think not a lot of people realize that that's one of the biggest bottlenecks in our food system around the processing side. How do you think about that topic and sort of the problems that it creates?
Yeah, well, that has developed over time, and it has been justified by using phrases like scale and efficiency and cheap food and those kinds of things. But of course, recently, especially since COVID, that efficiency is starting to break down, and we're seeing a profound awareness of fragility. And so the new operative term is resilience. And I think people are beginning to realize that if you're not resilient first, if you don't survive first, there's nothing to be efficient about later. So the first thing is to be resilient, to be a survivor. And so, what's happening right now and what happened in COVID is these great big outfits, as you mentioned perfectly, the concentration of these outfits are fragile when you have viruses, when you have people on top of each other working in moist, dark, tight conditions, and you're just vulnerable to diseases. That's just the way it is. A Tyson chicken house is far more vulnerable to a disease than a backyard flock of chickens. Either one of them could get sick. Absolutely, it could, but the vulnerability is way higher on the concentrated, larger thing. We all know that intuitively. I mean, if your county suddenly had an outbreak of the flu, people don't say, well, let's take all the kids and let's put them all in the gymnasium for a week till the flu passes. No, they close the schools and say, stay home, don't go, don't visit, stay around and let the thing run its course. We intuitively understand that that pathogens thrive in concentration, and they are hampered or they decrease with decentralization. And so the question I would just ask anyone who's reasonable listening to this podcast, I would simply ask, let me ask you this: if instead of 155,000 employee processing plants in 2020, if instead of 155,000 employee processing plants in 2020, what if instead we had 150,000 20 employee processing plants all over the US in all the little communities? Do you think we would have had as big a glitch in the food system and in the viral impact within those processing facilities if we had been that democratized and deconcentrated, decentralized? And I think intuitively, we don't need a rocket scientist to tell us, if we'd have had 150,000 plants instead of 150, or 150,000 small plants instead of 150 mega plants, we'd have been much less vulnerable. And so what's happening today is that these big, what I call aircraft carrier outfits are spending a lot of time now in human resources. They wake up every morning worrying about, oh man, is John down there in quadrant C gonna turn us into OSHA for not having the right COVID precautions or the right protective equipment? I mean, there's all these things going on, and that drives the thinking. In mechanical terms, we say it's carbon on the valves, whereas a place like ours is like a speedboat, and we're able to navigate stones and rocks and shoals, and we're nimble. There's a business book out. It's not the big that eats the small, it's the fast that eat the slow. It's all about being nimble. And so when you're smaller, you are more adaptable, you are more nimble. And what's fascinating to me is, for the first time in my life, we're seeing, for example, Tyson in the last 12 months raised beef prices 32%. We only raised ours 10%, because we don't buy any fertilizer. If we don't get any fertilizer from Russia, who cares? We don't even buy the stuff. If we don't get wheat from Ukraine, who cares? We don't buy Ukrainian wheat. We get all of our grain from farmers within 50 miles of us. So we have a direct supply chain. And so when you have this concentration and these expanded supply lines in disruptive times, what you have is fragility rather than resilience. And when you democratize and decentralize, which is part of diversity, okay, what you have then is, you might not have the same level of efficiency, but you have resistance, resilience, and you have adaptability and nimbleness. And if there's ever a time when we needed that, it's right now.
I know this is a super loaded question, but how do we democratize and decentralize in a way that will allow for the hyper localization of processors? Because obviously we're looking at it from an outsider's perspective. I heard it's incredibly difficult for someone to just start a processing facility, the legality, the startup costs, et cetera. So how do we go about decentralizing this?
You're right.
It's so loaded. I know.
That is such a loaded question.
I know.
Do we have another 2 hours? No, I'll condense this as fast as I can. I've got a couple ideas here to just throw out. One is that you are exactly right. The bureaucracy grows every day. It just continues to grow. It was interesting back when we had all those E. coli and salmonella outbreaks, 20 years ago, there was a big study conducted by, at that time, the General Accounting Office, GAO. It's not the GAO anymore, it's something else. But anyway, they did this bipartisan study on pathogens in the meat system in the U.S. And guess what? They put their finger on exactly the right. They said the reason we have this problem is centralization in production, centralization in processing, and long distance transportation, large scale warehousing, and subtherapeutic use of antibiotic. I mean, they nailed it directly. Now, wouldn't you think that somebody within the system would say, okay, if that's the culprit, what's the opposite? What's the opposite of large scale processing? Well, it'd be small scale. It'd be like community abattoirs and community canneries and community processing food systems. Well, what's the opposite of concentrated production? Oh, I think those would be like smaller family farms, right? Diversified farms with lots of different species on them. And so we know the answers. We just don't do it. And so the onerous licensing has become just mind numbing. So I've got a couple thoughts. One is that when compliance becomes so tyrannous that circumvention is more efficient, we need to go to circumvention. So a friend and I, John Moody and I, have convened now for 3 years. We've done several of these. They're called Rogue Food Conferences, Rogue RFC, Rogue Food Conferences. Our next one's coming up in Tennessee. I think it's Tennessee. Is it Tennessee or Kentucky? I'm not sure. You can Google Rogue Food Conference, just like it says. Yeah, August 16 and wait a minute. Where is it? I'm not sure here. Yeah, here it is. December 11 or December 10. December 10, Rogue Food Tennessee, Rogue Food Conference. And what these are conferences where we're finding the most clever, innovative circumventors in the country, people who have figured out how to transact meat and poultry commerce without any licensing whatsoever. Everything from personal membership associations like country clubs to a contract with your customer. We co-own the animal, and I'll butcher it on my front porch. I want the guts, you take the meat. I can butcher my own animal. I mean, there's all sorts of creative. There's a food church. Food church is being used. Where one of the membership perks is, you get meat. There's all sorts of cool stuff going on. And we're showcasing these people who have basically, thumbed their nose at the bureaucracy and said, forget you, we're going to transact business anyway. The second option, which I think really has traction, and I would love for the Libertarian Party to take this up, is what I call the Uberization of the food system. So a quick history. So, the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker was embedded in the village back, 500 years ago. And everybody knew who the good ones were and who the bad ones were, because they all lived in the village. They saw their kids. They saw them. They went to church together. They went to meet, talk to each other on the street. And they knew who the charlatans were and who the good ones were. And so you didn't need a bureaucracy to ride herd and give licenses. Well, with the industrial food system, all of these, the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker, became so large that nobody wanted in their backyard. And so they put razor wire up and guard houses and no trespassing signs. Well, people get scared when they see stuff behind no trespassing. What's going on back there? So people demanded a bureaucracy bigger than the industry. And that gave us the Food Safety Inspection Service, the Food Drug Administration, blah, blah, blah. So we got an industrial bureaucracy to handle an industrial food system. Well, what's happened now is with the internet, we have completely democratized the audit, the real-time auditability, and brought back at global scale the village voice of the butcher, baker, and candlestick maker. Who would have guessed 30 years ago that people by the millions would jump into cars with people who don't have a license, nothing at all, but nothing but an Uber app? The reason is because the riders can judge the drivers, and the drivers can judge the riders. And so the internet has democratized the audit trail in real time to take the government clear out of it. Airbnb 40 years ago, who would have thought that within 20 years, there would be more hospitality rooms in the world than Marriott, Sheraton, and Hilton combined, and nobody drove a nail in a wall. Can you believe that? And it was all done because of the mass democratization of access that the internet supplied. So I'm suggesting that just like we have Uberized the transportation system, we've Airbnb'd, Uberized the hospitality industry. Why not let's now Uberize the food system and say, if I'm happy, if I'm as a voluntary decision, why can't I, as a consenting adult, I'm using loaded language here, as a consenting adult, exercise freedom of choice to transact business with a friend without a bureaucrat getting in between our decision? If I want to come to your farm, ask around, look around, and as a voluntary consenting adult exercise freedom of choice for my microbiome, what's wrong with that? And so there is momentum, I think, in the system for moving in that direction. And so right now, that being said, there are numerous modular things. There's plant in a box. There are modular little plants springing up. But the problem with all these, and I'm not opposed to them, I'm just saying that all of the food safety, I know because we co-own a small slaughterhouse with 25 employees, and all of the regulations are size prejudicial. It's much easier to comply if you're big than if you're small. We have the same paperwork to fill out as a plant, even though we only do 50 cows a week. We have the same paperwork as a plant that does 50 cows a minute. Okay. And so so the prejudice, so it takes us at our plant $500 to do what Iowa Beef Packers does in $80. So when you have, $80 versus $500, that's a huge price prejudice when it comes to the marketplace. So that's what's happening within the system, and that's what creates these arbitrary, capricious hurdles for small scale production, and it puts small scale producers at a price disadvantage in the marketplace. And so yeah. I wish I had a magic recipe. I can tell you it's a huge problem. As the society goes into dysfunction, the big $64 million question is the government going to get worse and worse, or will the government just cease to exist and fall into disarray? And I think historically we have to say the government's going to get worse and worse and worse until we finally have collapse and it implodes. Have no idea when that will be, but it doesn't bode well. So I'm a big believer in circumvention at this point, a circumvention rather than compliance. And let's put our creativity on our heads and forget trying to figure out how to bow, and instead figure out how to buck.
Joel, have you found during the past two years, high tension time period, that a lot of your ideas that you just talked about were they becoming more validated, and were people, or I guess my ultimate question is, what have you learned over the past 2 years during this pandemic time period, through operating your farm, through talking to more farmers? Like, what's kind of been your big takeaways from that time period as it relates to all the things that you were just talking about in terms of democratizing the food system?
Yeah, well, first of all, it has been perhaps the most affirming 2 years of my life. I mean,
Right.
I've been this ugly ugly Cinderella in the ashes all my life, being accused of being a bioterrorist and what do you want to do? Murder half the world because we know you can't feed the world, and that sort of thing. And suddenly, we're sitting in the driver's seat. We're seeing this, and we now have literally a homestead tsunami going on in the country. I mean, people are leaving the city. They're looking for 2, 3, 5, 10 acres. They are looking for self-reliance. They're looking for this opportunity. And there are homesteading fairs and conferences just springing up all over the country. And it is absolutely one of the most exciting times I've ever been alive. For us personally in our business, it's the first time in my life that we feel like we're actually becoming, literally by the day, more competitive in pricing in the marketplace, because we're not subject to the big things. I mean, look at gas costs. The average farm in America, half of their expenses are petroleum. Half of their expenses. On our farm, only 5% of our expenses are petroleum.
Wow.
Now, do I like high gas prices? No, I don't like it. But think about the viability. Think about our viability. If we're 5% fuel oriented versus 50% fuel oriented, that means at least we'll be the last guy standing. And of course, you hope that by the time you're the last guy standing, somebody else, figured out how to join you, on the mountain. And so there is, so what I've learned is both encouragement and affirmation. I've seen literally a tsunami of interest in small scale, food production and rural, what I call agrarian bunkers. Around the country, and what I'm optimistic about is just the whole price differentiation as our resiliency shows itself credible and valid. By the day we become more and more a valid option within the system. That's very exciting. So, there's a lot to be frustrated and angry about in this whole deal. But I try to encourage people to say, look, at the bottom of the day, yes, you can be angry, you can be frustrated. That's all negative. Let's see if we can invert that and take all that negative energy and focus it into positive innovation and creativity so that we can be hope and help when the culture becomes hopeless and helpless.
Wow. That's so powerful. So it's something we love to ask our guests as we wrap up our conversations. We love to just say, when you think about the future of the food system and just humanity in general, are you generally optimistic? And it sounds like for you, you definitely are. Is that fair to say?
I'm pessimistic about the overall where the culture's going. I'm pessimistic about the overall society and the culture, but I'm extremely optimistic about what we as individuals and communities, as we geographically proximate into a new tribalism of shared value and aggregate to ourselves people who know how to build things, fix things, and grow things. We need our communities to be looking at our eclectic skill mastery base. Who knows how to grow something? Who knows how to fix stuff? Who knows how to build stuff? And we need to actually be investing in those relationships. If that means pulling your money out of the stock market and investing in is a diesel mechanic school or plumbing or some sort of a vocational skill or goodness, taking some people that you've put off knowing in your community, take them out to dinner, build relationships. I mean, that's where I think we're entering a time where people are realizing that those kinds of it's the non-monetary things that are going to be more valuable than money, especially since money has gone off the rails.
Mm. Joel, maybe before we wrap up, for someone who's been listening and saying, oh, this Joel Salatin guy is really onto something here. He's hit the nail on the head in terms of creating better quality food, but how can you possibly feed the world or feed our population in this way? How do you think about, that topic in general, just supplying enough food for people? Is it a community-based approach, like you've been talking about, or, how do you think about that?
Yeah, well, there again, I have a whole 1-hour presentation to answer that question. It's one of my most popular ones.
I saved it right for the end.
Yeah, but I'll give you just a couple bullet points. First of all, right now, the world is throwing away almost 50% of human edible food. It's past the sell-by date. It's blemished. It's got a little rust on it. It's not perfect. Blah blah blah. And so right now we're that level of throwing away food has never happened in human history before. We've always had, different streams. If the cabbage isn't perfect, it goes into sauerkraut. If the apple isn't perfect, it goes into applesauce. But we've lost those, those salvage strains today. And so, almost half of the food in the world. So the point is there's plenty of food. Don't worry about running out of food. There's plenty of it. Number two, America has 35 million acres of lawn and 36 million acres housing and feeding recreational horses. That's 71 million acres. That's enough to feed the entire country without a single farm. So, and I haven't even gotten to golf courses yet. So the truth is that we are not even scratching the surface on productive capacity. And number three, if we integrated our system, so going back to the first one, instead of having ornamental trees, we could have edible landscaping. It doesn't take any more room to grow an apple tree as it does, a non-fruit bearing apple tree. So let's take our yards and let's edibilize them. I wrote a book called Polyface Micro about how to have chickens and rabbits in a Manhattan apartment without smell. And so we can micro down beautifully these systems to integrate them. So, we can have, Pat Foreman wrote City Chicks, and she pointed out that if 1 in 3 households had enough chickens to eat their food scraps, there would not be an egg industry in the United States. That would produce all the eggs we need without a single egg in the supermarket. So we need to integrate our spaces rather than segregate our spaces. And then beyond that, for sure, the biological approach, this whole idea that, that non-chemical farming isn't as productive, it stems from the whole, from the old notion that, that chemicals beat out compost. Well, the problem was that it took a while for compost that Sir Albert Howard developed in 1943. It took a while for that for all the ingredients to metabolize. We needed chainsaws and chippers and black plastic pipe and front end loaders to really metabolize an efficient compost system. And so the point of innovation always is a ragged edge where you have this point of innovation and then you have, other things around it. And so, compost was an innovation in 1943, took about, 20 years for the infrastructure to metabolize around it. Meanwhile, chemicals were, the chemical approach was really given a shot in the arm by World War I, World War II, which required N, P, and K, nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus to make ammunition. And so the war effort subsidized the chemical laboratory, mining, distribution, marketing systems, so that at the end of World War II, with a lot of farm boys dead in the war, Dad's sitting there, what am I going to do? Well, you can either do compost, which requires shoveling some more, or you can put on this little bag of 10, 10, 10. Which would you choose? So be gentle on Grandpa. You and I in the same position probably would have reached for the same thing. And so the fact is, and then it took about 20 years for the metabolism of compost to beat out to beat out the chemicals, but the narrative, the land grant colleges and the US I call it the US that had been clear. The orthodoxy by that time, by the 1960s, was well entrenched in the chemical approach. And that's why in 1961, when Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring, that was the wake up call. Now maybe we've gone too far. Here's the point, guys. The point is, if we had a Manhattan Project for compost, not only would we have fed the world, we would have done it without three-legged salamanders, infertile frogs, and a dead zone the size of Rhode Island in the Gulf of Mexico. That's the truth. Man,
I feel like I just got a PhD in everything land management and food system. This has been amazing.
It's a mic drop right there.
Joel, we're so grateful to have had you on. This has been an amazing conversation, and our audience is going to love it. So really appreciate you taking the time to join us, and you are always welcome back on the Meat Mafia podcast. So hopefully we can get a part 2 going at some point in the future.
Thank you. Glad to do it. All you got to do is holler. You know how to get a hold of me. And thank you for the opportunity and the platform. And come see us. Come see us when you can.
We will. Absolutely.
That's what, Harry, we should do part 2 at Polyface, do a live podcast. That would be cool.
That'd be amazing. Let's do it.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate it, Joel. Thanks so much for doing this, man, and hope to meet you soon in the future. Okay.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.